Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 19th anniversary of Lunch for the Cure. I'm Brooke from Brooke and Jeffrey in the Morning on Moving 92.5. I don't know if we made that obvious or not. But we are so thrilled to be here, even if it is just virtually, okay? So I want everyone to grab the lunch that they have, okay? Whether that's soup, sandwich, last night's leftovers, pumpkin spice, whatever. And let's do this together. I am so thrilled to be here. I really am. It's one of my most favorite events of the entire year. And it's really because of you, the South Sound. I mean, you're the most energetic, enthusiastic, supportive community in the entire Puget Sound region. Please don't tell the other guys, okay? But we all know here that it is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and your commitment to the virtual lunch this year demonstrates your desire and your willingness to stand against breast cancer. And I just really want to thank each and every one of you for joining in Komen's commitment to save lives. I mean, that's really what we're here for, which is a pretty amazing thing. And throughout today's Lunch for the Cure, you're going to be helping Komen give hope, of course, as well, to thousands of women and men living with breast cancer right here in the South Sound. And I love that. We always keep it local. Komen Puget Sound has an amazing group of sponsors who come back year after year, and we really couldn't do events like this without you, so we definitely have to take the time to say big thank yous right now. Our presenting sponsors, Harbor Credit Union, we love you. Cairo 7 News, big heart emoji, okay? Silver sponsors, Titus Will, NW Medical Specialties, awesome. Supporters, NAI, Puget Sound Properties, Korean Women's Association, Connolly Law, Metropolitan Market. I mean, really, go get the cookie. Seriously, it's so good. Patrick Cahill at Area 253 Glass Blowing with his amazing art, Brown and Haley. Thank you so much, and all these wonderful sponsors. You know, we couldn't do it without you, and we also couldn't do it without our volunteer power. And man, are they tough. They're strong, and we really have the best, most dedicated volunteers out there. Of course, this year, Ginny Douglas and Tracy Jones led the committee and did a fantastic work. They've worked really hard on today's lunch and obviously rolled with a lot of different punches to make this happen. And thank you so much, Ginny, Tracy, and the lunch committee for your hard work. We really appreciate it. And now I am pleased to introduce the executive director of Komen Puget Sound, Molly O'Connor. Molly?
Thanks, Brooke, and thank you all for making the time to be with us today. I'd like to take a moment to thank a few more people who are integral to the work of Komen Puget Sound in this event. First, a special thanks to our presenting sponsor, CHI Franciscan. Thank you, Brooke Fox of the Brooke and Jeffrey Show on Moving 92.5 for being our MC today and for all you do to support Komen. Thank you to our speakers, Dr. Frank Senecal and Michelle Millman. We are incredibly grateful for your continued support of Komen and the breast cancer community. I know Brooke already thanked the lunch committee, but I need to get in my gratitude as well. This dedicated group of volunteers is the key to this lunch's success. I would also like to recognize our board president, Dr. Amy Singh, as well as our entire board for supporting this event and their dedicated leadership of Komen Puget Sound. Finally, thank you to the staff at Komen Puget Sound who have worked tirelessly on all of our virtual events this fall. Now it's time to settle back with your lunch and hear from our two wonderful speakers. Dr. Frank Senecal, noted and beloved Tacoma oncologist, will share how research from the lab to the bedside is bringing better care and therapies to breast cancer patients on a daily basis. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Senecal to the screen.
This is Frank Senecal. I'm a medical oncologist in Tacoma, and it's my pleasure to discuss with you a little bit about research in the South Sound area. First of all, I want to give some appreciation to the Komen Foundation, really a unique organization that has had so much success over the past several years in generating funds for research in breast cancer. Really, it's really a unique success. In addition to research, of course, they support programs for education and screening. They do just tremendous work. Uniformly, I think at our largest breast cancer meetings nationally, the Komen Foundation has played a major role in the advances that are reported at those meetings. So we have a lot to be grateful for with the Komen Foundation. I hope you support them today. I did want to talk today about research here in the South Sound area. So I want to talk to you a little bit about how research is done here in the South Sound. One of the organizations involved in research was the South Sound Care Foundation, a nonprofit that we started about 8 years ago, and give you a little history and insight as to research through the South Sound Care Foundation. This is the mission statement of South Sound, developed about 9 years ago by a group of 8 people that met in a coffee house and recognized the importance of bringing great research here to this area. There are really 4 areas that South Sound has focused on, and these are all associated with research in breast cancer. The NCI clinical trials program, pharmaceutical trials, physician-initiated trials, and compassionate use trials. The National Cancer Institute identifies certain key priorities regarding cancer research for the United States. And in breast cancer, they identify specific strategies to improve the care for breast cancer patients, improve the treatments in hopes of improving the opportunities for cure. And the National Cancer Institute, back in the 1970s, when the war on cancer was stated, formed these cooperative groups around the United States. And now there are, I believe, 6 of these. These are, in general, academic institutions that work with hospital systems, healthcare systems, physician practices to bring clinical trials to the community. Tacoma has a great deal of history with this. Really was one of the first cities in the country to be accepted into this organization and to start clinical trials for cancer way back in the early 1980s. We have this trial system to thank for bringing us advances such as the value of using tamoxifen in patients that have had breast cancer, using tamoxifen to reduce the risk of recurrence. They were fundamental in developing chemotherapy regimens that have been of use, particularly in patients that have more aggressive breast cancers, to reduce the risk of recurrence. So really have played a pivotal role. The South Sound Care Foundation is actually bringing back those clinical trials through the cooperative group system to Tacoma, specifically to coordinate that with CHI Franciscan. And also it's our plan to work with Madigan Army Hospital in this regard, and hopefully the Salish Cancer Program run by the Puyallup tribe. I want to talk a little bit about pharmaceutical trials that CARE participates in. These are trials that are developed by a specific pharmaceutical company, usually to bring that agent to market. And for example, a new medication may be developed that can target a specific abnormality in the cancer cell. And pharmaceutical trials or pharmaceutical company may discuss with hundreds of different sites around the country the possibility of them participating in development of that medication. It requires that the individuals at that location become well-versed in the protocols, and they have to meet certain requirements in order to participate in the trial. But these pharmaceutical trials that are developed are crucial, really, to bringing some of the most important treatments to market for breast cancer. Many of the agents that you're familiar with, for example, the aromatase inhibitors that were developed now 15 years ago, were brought to the clinic through these pharmaceutical trials and then subsequently became FDA approved. South Sound Care participates in a number of pharmaceutical trials. We have a particular emphasis, not so much on breast cancer in that regard, but in regard to prostate cancer for men. So pharma trials are key and play an important role in the development of better medications for the treatment of cancer. One example that I'll give you in regard to a pharmaceutical trial involves this agent. And this is a medication that was developed for breast cancer, a particular form of breast cancer referred to as HER2-positive breast cancer. And some of you may be familiar with it. HER2-positive breast cancer carries a specific protein on the surface of the cancer cell that can be targeted. The medication that has really revolutionized the treatment of that cancer is Herceptin. And some of you, I'm sure, have heard of that medication. Developed at UCLA during the 1990s and early decade of the 2000s. This is an advancement beyond that. In HER2, the name of this medication is a combination of two factors. One, on the left-hand side, the Herceptin molecule, which you can see, which is really an antibody that targets specifically that protein on the cancer cell. The second component of this is on the right-hand side, and this is the payload, or a chemotherapy molecule that is delivered to the cancer cell by the Herceptin protein attaching to that cancer cell. So it delivers a molecule directly to the cancer cell in this way, minimizing exposure of the patient to the chemotherapy or minimizing other organs being exposed to the chemotherapy molecule. So it's a particularly targeted treatment. This was FDA approved, I believe, in December, if I'm not mistaken, December or January. This is a PET scan of a patient that I'm familiar with who unfortunately developed metastatic breast cancer involving the superior portion of the mediastinum. This is a picture of the thorax, and you can see that white area that is shows up in the middle of the chest there is cancer, and pretty extensive cancer from which the patient was quite symptomatic. She was subsequently treated with Enhertu, this antibody-linked agent, and you can see the results from that. A pretty dramatic reduction in this area of cancer in the chest. And fortunately, the patient's doing very well and staying on that medication right now. So it can be, the pharmaceutical companies do a tremendous job in regard to drug development, and we have a great deal to be grateful for in regard to their research. Physician-directed trials. This is a different group of trials that are not related to the NCI, the National Cancer Institute, or to pharmaceutical trials, but particularly designed by a specific physician, by a doctor who wants to answer a specific question in regard to cancer therapy. Our foundation, South Sound Care, has had quite a bit of experience with this. There's essentially no funding for these trials. There's no monetary funding whatsoever. So South Sound Care thanks to so many generous people in our community, has acquired the resources to be able to support research in this area. One of those trials is called the triple negative trial. And this is a trial where we're looking at women who have a particularly virulent form of breast cancer. This is triple negative breast cancer. And we're specifically looking at patients who have metastatic triple negative breast cancer. Unfortunately, the survival with that disease is short with metastatic disease, on the order of 12 to 17 months. So we have to improve the results of our treatment for these ladies. And this is a trial where a specific, very in-depth molecular testing is done to look at the characteristics of the cancer, specifically the DNA, the RNA, and certain immune markers associated with the cancer. Very in-depth analysis. When we started this trial, the cost of doing that analysis was somewhere above $3,000 per case. Now the cost, fortunately, has come down, and thanks to a relationship that we've developed with Caris Oncology, the Caris Genomic Company, these tests are done gratis. But it gives us a great deal of insight as to what might be a good therapeutic target to treat the cancer. We have 49 patients who have been on the trial. All of these patients had in-depth analysis of the cancer, a DNA analysis, an RNA analysis. In all of these cases, all these women benefited because we had a tumor board that involved oncologists, scientists from the Northwest, scientists from around the country commenting on the findings that we obtained from this molecular analysis, and then gave recommendations regarding treatment. Not only that, but the information was put on the web through a special secure system that allowed scientists around the country and other oncologists to comment regarding treatments. The result of that is that we got a great deal of information about how best to treat our patients on this trial. And we think that we've had some really significant successes. This is just a list of collaborators that have been participating in this trial with us, a number of academic institutions, Swedish Hospital, SCCA, Fred Hutchinson, our practice, which is Northwest Medical, but also industry, Nant Health, Caris Health, Epic Science, AbbVie, Genentech. And all of this information is placed on the web through the All4Cure platform, which is a platform developed by Dr. Tony Blau, allows easy access to the information for these researchers to be able to comment regarding appropriate treatment. This is just a slide looking at our 49 patients and how they have done. And I'm not sure that you can make it out, but those two light yellow lines depict the general reported survival rates for women with triple negative breast cancer. And our bars, you can see in many cases are surpassing that average survival rate. So really not credible to give you an average in terms of survival, but you can see that many of our patients are doing much better than what's been reported in the past. And we think it has a great deal to do with communication, collaboration to identify the very best that science has to offer for treatment for these patients. Our next trial through South Sound Care Foundation is a trial that's going to look at early detection of metastatic disease. You see, when triple negative breast cancer is first diagnosed and treated, for example, with chemotherapy and then surgery, the patient is therefore without measurable disease. There's no obvious disease. But unfortunately, a good portion of those patients relapse. And typically, relapse is identified on a CAT scan or identified on the physical exam as a new lymph node or something such as that. This is a way of early detection that we plan on implementing in study format at South Sound Care to detect recurrence in the blood much earlier than it can be detected clinically by a CAT scan. Turns out that these cancer cells are secreted into the blood, and actually the DNA is secreted in the blood. And there are techniques now where the cancer DNA can be identified within the blood, isolated, and analyzed. And through some very in-depth molecular testing, we can separate it from the patient's normal DNA and actually even identify mutations in the DNA of the cancer. So it can allow for a unique early detection of cancer, we believe, and we want to implement this here in the South Sound as a clinical trial in the near future to perhaps help us identify those patients who need treatment earlier than has been previously we've been able to perform. When you think about research in the United States, the old model has been traveling to research institutes, either traveling to Multicare or traveling to Franciscan or traveling to Northwest Medical Specialties, or if a trial was not available in Tacoma, traveling to Seattle, or in some circumstances, traveling out of state, for example, to UCLA or to Houston or to New York. So in that model, the patient needs to get up and travel. And sometimes that's extremely difficult. Many of our patients, of course, are tired and weak from their cancer. Traveling even to Seattle can be exhausting. And it's nothing for one of our patients who might be at the Seattle Cancer Care Alliance to spend 7 or 10 hours at the clinic receiving their therapy and then have to commute back home at the end of the day. So even though we're blessed with a great resource such as Fred Hutchinson Center and the University of Washington, travel to those sites is frankly challenging. And travel to other sites around the country is most often impossible for our patients. They just can't afford the expense of that travel for a clinical trial, the time, lost time from work, and leaving their family. So very difficult kind of situation. If a clinical trial is not available or research option not available in the immediate community, it can be a huge challenge. Well, we'd like to change that model. And one way we're doing it at South Sound is we're developing a compassionate use process. This is a system where we can acquire unique, novel treatments that are being tested, perhaps not in the Washington area, but perhaps somewhere else in the United States, have gone through phase 1 testing, we know are safe. And through this compassionate use process, we can acquire those medications or novel treatments and bring those to the community. Now, in the past, it's required a great deal of effort in order to do that. It requires about 140 hours or so of clinical research time, of physician time, in order to perform the regulatory steps necessary in order to bring a medication from out of state into Tacoma for use for a patient. This gives you an idea of the steps that generally are necessary in order to bring a novel medicine, an experimental medicine that we think might be of value to our patient, to Tacoma. The steps the process can be onerous. However, recently we've developed a relationship with ANOVA, and ANOVA has streamlined this process so that the communication between the provider of the medication, which is oftentimes a pharmaceutical company, and the FDA has been eased, that the process has been smoothed out so that the time and effort necessary to acquire one of these compassionate use agents has been shortened from it taking 2 months to acquire the medication to it requiring 2 weeks. So a much shorter time to bring perhaps life-saving treatment to a patient here in the South Sound for their care. The solution is close coordination with the FDA, developing relationships and communications with PHARMA, streamlining the regulatory process so that both the FDA, PHARMA, and South Sound Care are communicating smoothly, and also to build a physician network. So physicians who participate in this process, when they have a patient who might benefit from a clinical trial, but that trial is not available, perhaps this compassionate use process will allow patients to obtain unique special medications that can treat their cancer more effectively. This gives you an idea of the partnerships that are necessary and the steps that are necessary in order to do this. And as I say, ANOVA and South Sound Care are working in partnership to accomplish this. So the model now, in many circumstances, may not be that a patient has to travel across the United States. It may be that we bring the medication to the patient through this process in a more effective, efficient manner. So we've embraced this. We have this relationship with ANOVA, and we're hopeful that it's going to be an active mechanism for bringing our very best treatments to our patients here in the South Sound. I want to also comment before I close about the importance of developing relationships. We have a number of partners in the South Sound area. It's all about bringing the very best to our patients here. It's not about one specific healthcare system or one specific practice. It's about providing options for treatment for all our patients. Therefore, South Sound Care Foundation has close relationships with CHI Franciscan, and we're developing that further to bring the compassionate use process to CHI Franciscan for their patients. At MultiCare, we've been involved in supporting their pharmaceutical trials by supporting staff personnel in order to execute those trials efficiently and effectively. We're in now negotiations with the Puyallup tribe of Indians at the Salish Cancer Center to facilitate research at their center, which to date research hasn't really been an option for them. But we are hopeful that we'll be able to bring that to the Salish Cancer Center for their patients. And finally, Madigan, which has a great history of giving great care to our military and retired military, needs our support. And we think that South Sound Care Foundation can provide some additional support for Madigan so that they can reactivate their clinical research program. I want to mention that all of this is done without cost to any of these folks in our community. These are our partners, and it's our intent to do this without cost to them. We have been fortunate to be blessed by a lot of really generous foundations and individuals in the South Sound area, and at least at this point, CARE can afford to provide that effort for them. So what is success here? Success for the treatment of cancer, and specifically for breast cancer, is better access to clinical trials. It's bringing the best options to our patients here in the South Sound, whether that's a formal clinical trial, a compassionate use trial, a physician-initiated trial. That's the way we're going to get more cures, and that's the way our patients are going to be more hopeful. So with those comments, I'll close, and I want to thank Komen for their support over the years. Great organization, and we strongly encourage and all the support that you can give Komen. They've done a great job nationally to reduce that nemesis of breast cancer, reduce the impact on our community, and help our patients. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Senecal. Everyone watching is standing behind you as you work toward accomplishing our shared goal of saving lives. Our next speaker's story is an inspiring and oh so honest account of her breast cancer journey over the past decade. Please welcome Michelle Millman, Cairo 7 news anchor and breast cancer survivor, to the screen. Michelle.
Thank you so much, Molly. My story begins with this: one step at a time, one appointment at a time, one test result at a time. That's what got me through, and staying off the internet. That was the best advice I got, and it was from my oncologist. I figured he would know, so I listened to that throughout my ordeal. It was the summer of 2009, July. My husband and I were having a big backyard barbecue, lots of friends, coworkers over. I was just about to jump in the shower, and I happened to look down, and on the top of my right breast, right here, there it was, a lump, and it was big. This family picture you see here was taken at a Cairo 7 event just before that. As for the lump, I had nothing like this to compare it to, but I knew in my heart it was big and something was wrong. I said to Mike, "Can you see that?" He said, "Yeah, and you need to call someone like right now." As I mentioned, it was a Saturday, so that was kind of hard to do. I had to host a barbecue, I had a shower to take, I had last minute things to get done. But more than all of that, here's what also flashed through my mind. I had 2 boys to raise. They were just 8 and 10 years old. They are older in this picture here, but here they are, the most important people in my life. My husband worked hours and hours at the Everett Fire Department away from home. I had a dream job. I had no time for this lump. And all of this went through my head because deep down I knew this was not a normal that time of the month bump. I kept thinking, how on earth? How long had this been there? How did I miss this? You kind of start the blame game, right? Well, I made that call Monday after a very stressful weekend of worrying. I described what I felt and saw, and the next thing I hear on the phone would be the first thing to rock my world. She said, "We hold open appointments for calls just like this. Can you be here this afternoon in a few hours?" Yep, I could. And so it began. From there, really, it was a blur of activity from one biopsy, ultrasound, MRI, bone scan to the next. I'll spare you all those details. What's interesting to me is through all of this, I slept really well at night. That seems so strange to me. It didn't take me long to realize that falling asleep was easy despite of all of my fears going through my head. That's because when I slept, I didn't have cancer. It was a glorious 7 hours or so of peace every night, my mind quiet. Then I'd wake up. I had cancer, stage 2B, invasive lobular, they call it. It had traveled into my armpit area right here. I needed a plan. I got into work that next day and asked the boss if I could have a moment of his time. I gave him the news, and 2 bosses were in that meeting, and they were very sympathetic, understanding, and said anything I needed to let them know. And boy, how true that was. Work was just fabulous for me. I took a few days off work right then to get a lumpectomy, and that's where we started. At this point, my husband and I thought, hey, we'll get out of this thing with a lumpectomy and some radiation. It sounds crazy, but that sounded pretty fabulous given what else could happen. So I started with that lumpectomy and figured I'd be back at Cairo 7 while undergoing radiation. Easy peasy. Well, not so fast. Then came that call. It was the night before I was to go back to work. It was pretty late. I remember it being dinner time. Got a call from my surgeon. I had a lump in another quadrant of that same breast, my right breast, that they were able to biopsy during my lumpectomy. That's when I found out the cancer made it to a lymph node. It had traveled outside of my breast tissue. I was crushed. My surgeon, right then on the phone, told me this and recommended a mastectomy. I held it together during that call, listened to her as best I could. Still needed that plan. I would go to see her in a few days, but I also needed to call out to work because then I was going back on that next morning. Then for the first and last time during this ordeal, I could not hold it together. I couldn't call my boss and tell him the news. Mike had to call my news director and say I couldn't come in the next day or the next weeks or months. Mind you, it was never about me or my boobs. It was all about my children. Am I going to leave them without a mom? This is a picture of my first Puget Sound Komen Race for the Cure walk. I'm with my oldest boy here, who was just 10, and my mom at the time. And as I mentioned, the older one was 10, the youngest was 8 at the time, and I had to beat this for them. But with this diagnosis and thyroid cancer just the year before, what would I possibly pass on to my kids? It's all I could think about. It became crystal clear I was going to give this cancer everything I had and everything my team of doctors wanted to throw at it. It's really still hard to talk about all of this, but it did become a little easier as the days, weeks, and months went by. At some point during all of this, my husband and I sat down with our boys and told them what was going on with Mom. And the first question, Mom, are you going to die? My husband took the lead here. No, boys, she's not, he said. To be honest, though, I had no idea. I wanted to scream that sometimes when well-meaning people would tell me, this is just a bump in the road. You'll be okay, or you got this. I know their hearts were in the right place, of course, but man, that was tough to hear again and again, as if they were saying, this is really no big deal. No big deal at all. You do try to remain positive for everyone around you when they say things like that and hold them up, trying to make them feel comfortable with the news. But those thoughts you have that you really don't share with anyone can be grim and realistic. But I soldiered on and I became a warrior in pink, bathed in pink really, and the flowers and the cards and the meals from friends and my amazing coworkers really started rolling in. Then came the surgery. My cancer was only in my right breast, as I mentioned, but I told my surgeon I wanted a double mastectomy. I will never forget, she said to me, you only have cancer in your right breast. Why take the left as well? And I trusted her. She's awesome. I said I didn't want to worry about the left for the rest of my life. That's when she gave something to think about. She said, well, okay, Michelle, if you had cancer in your right arm, you wouldn't cut off the left. Wow. I mean, that was a gut punch. I thought on it for a few days, but really that's the beauty of it all. It was my decision. I had control to do what was best for me, and I did. A double mastectomy was my call. After that came the chemo, and I sat through a long meeting with the chemo guy who explained what all of this, including something they call the red devil, would do to me and to the cancer. I was all in. They have it down, including knowing basically the exact date your hair will start falling out. They nailed it. And since I knew it was coming, I went shopping for wigs. In my gut, though, I knew I really wasn't a wig person and that I would likely be one to wear hats or go bald or whatever, right? I bought those wigs anyway. One looked like the news anchor hair I had at the time. The other was more fun. It was a little longer, and I called it the long Jennifer Aniston. Well, I never wore them. They sat in my closet, and I ended up passing them on to other breast cancer patients. I hope they helped them feel just a little more normal with what they had going on. I also knew when the hair started falling out, I wanted to shave it. You've probably heard this before. You take some kind of control doing that. My husband, a captain in the Everett Fire Department, had told his crew he was going to shave his head when he shaved mine. He had no idea what would happen next. Before we knew it, a head shaving event, I'll call it more of a party, was scheduled at one of the fire stations, and about 60 firefighters were coming to shave their heads in support of me and of my husband, Mike. I was overwhelmed, to say the least. This is us at the very end there. A few people took a turn shaving my head, and it was both gut-wrenching and wonderful at the same time. I was overwhelmed with gratitude and their gesture. And that's us there, smiles and all, when the deed was done. We're at the fire station there, and it was truly an awesome day. A few weeks later, our boys joined in. You can see here they were upset, and this was a family affair. My husband had shaved his, and there he is shaving the youngest boy, Luke, there as Jake holds his towel for him. They were still scared, as you can see on their faces. They were scared at what Mom was going through, but I think at their young age, it also gave them some control as well. I was also fortunate that I never got crazy sick on my chemo regimen. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't fun, and I threw up and felt sick most of the time, but I was able to maintain some sense of normalcy for my boys. Mike went back to work after a few weeks, and I was so fortunate due to great health care that I was able to take off the next 6 months from my early morning shift at Cairo 7 and waking up at 2:30 to instead being able to concentrate on my family and my health. There were lows for sure. Remember all those flowers I talked about getting and the meals? It actually made my husband kind of upset. We appreciated it so much, but let me explain. He thought it was like a funeral, and he knew I was going to live. He never had a doubt, but he felt our living room looked like I died. I understood he was grieving too, even though he never doubted my survival. There were thoughts, as I mentioned, that I didn't share with anyone. The what ifs, the how will my boys do without me? Those thoughts were usually short-lived, but yeah, they were there. Those well-meaning comments I talked about earlier, my first experience with this was my first day of chemo. Right here, one of my closest friends, you see her here with me. This is at my very last chemo appointment. She was with me. And after we went to my first chemo appointment, we went to Bellevue Square. We were walking by the makeup counter, and the woman who worked there recognized me. Now, at that point, I still had my hair, but I'd cut it really short. I decided to do that so when I shaved my head, it wouldn't be such a jolt to my boys. They would be somewhat used to seeing me with really short hair. Anyway, the gal recognized me and asked why I cut my hair. I told her about my diagnosis. She excitedly and then kind of worriedly says, please, whatever you do, don't do chemo. It's poison. That's what will kill you. Do what Suzanne Summers did, natural remedies, or she said something like that. I had no idea. By then, I couldn't even hear anything else. My mind was just jumping around. It made me so upset. I calmly said, well, today was my very first chemo, and they call it Red Devil. And then my friend, there she is, Wendy, she has always had my back no matter what, really kind of gave her a piece of her mind, and then we were out of there. We were gone. The other thing that happened is after being out with my story through a blog that I started writing and a few stories Cairo 7 had done with me on breast cancer, organizations started reaching out for me to speak and tell my story. Well, it took a bit until I was ready, but the very first event I did in front of hundreds of people telling my story, I was still pretty bald and it was all pretty raw, and I had just finished months of chemo and my radiation. After my speaking part, I left the stage and I was really so worn out, I didn't stay. So I was walking up the aisle and I get out to the lobby of the venue to go home, to head home. And I'd been hearing someone kind of yelling a name, but I couldn't make it out. As I got closer and I was almost to the door, I could hear it was my name. She was out of breath and had been running after me. I turned around and she said, I just wanted to tell you, thank you for sharing your story. My aunt had your exact type of cancer and just died. And you're just hit in the face with that. Keep in mind, I just finished my treatment and had just started taking tamoxifen and had no idea how I would react to that anti-estrogen drug. So I was still in treatment. To this day, I still feel bad about how I reacted to that woman that night. I just said, I'm sorry for your loss, I have to go. And I turned around, made it to the door and started bawling. I mean, I cried, really cried my entire drive home. And I knew she meant well, and hearing my story and seeing me alive maybe gave her hope for the women in her family who might also have to face breast cancer. But man, that was hard to hear. At that point, I didn't know if I would live, and hearing her aunt had just died, it just kind of rocked my world. But There were laughs as well. One instance, still crystal clear in my mind, happened on our first family vacation after all of this. I was a bit hesitant to wear a swimsuit and go into the pool. You see, at that point, I hadn't decided whether to get breast implants, so I had nothing. I wore these little plastic rubbery deals to somewhat fill out my swimsuit. Why? I don't really know. I wasn't used to not having breasts, and I guess I felt like people, strangers, would notice and stare. Why did I care? I still don't know, but I did. So my boys and husband are in the hotel pool. The boys are begging me, come on in, Mom, come on and play. I kept putting them off, knowing these little rubbery deals were going to be a problem, right? They weren't really secured. Finally, I thought, get over yourself. And I got in, we played some volleyball, we goofed around a bit. Then I realized, one of my boobs was missing. My gosh, I was horrified. The boys saw me looking for something around the pool and asked, what are you looking for, Mom? Well, I played it off for a while, then thought, what the heck? I'll just describe what it looks like. They had goggles, and mind you, what they were looking for was clear, circular, not easy to spot in the water. So they really still didn't know what it was. I just told them what it looked like. They looked and looked and looked. We all did for what seemed like forever. It was probably just about 10 minutes. And then a little girl pops up over by a drain and yells, is this what you're looking for? Holding it up over her head, so proud. And I said, yes, yes it is. And guess what? No one cared. No one looked. I put it back in place and I just continued on. It made me laugh. And you know, that story reminds me, always try to laugh. Take what life brings you with joy and not feel ashamed for being different, but beautiful in each of our own ways. This is a picture of me in my first show back at Cairo 7 after my treatment. As you can see, short hair. It's coming in a little curly as well and kind of gray. I asked my boss if I could come back a few weeks prior to this when my hair was still coming in. Now, after being bald, I really thought it was fine that I had kind of long hair. Well, he said, not really. How would you feel about wearing a wig? Well, as I told you earlier, I didn't really feel comfortable. I said, I don't want to wear a wig. I want to go on the air like this. He said, well, let's give your hair a few more weeks. So then, this is a few more weeks. This is what it looked like when I went on TV. And despite the smile here, I was nervous, but also excited to show women, see, it'll be okay. I'm here doing this, and you can make it through chemo too. Hopefully to come out the other side, however that looks for you. Being reminded to try and laugh still helps me today. And a lot of what I learned, I try to tell others. Those women who call, email, or message me, I don't tell them, this is just a bump in the road, or you'll get through this just fine. That's not for me to say, but I do try to give them hope as much as I can. I tell them it stinks. I'm sorry they have to go through this. I tell them what I know to be true. We have so many in our corner. That's people like you listening this afternoon. We need you. Breast cancer is still too prevalent. Those thoughts in my head, 10 years later, they are still here, but not as loud. I got to fire my oncologist in February. That was a big day, and I stopped taking that anti-estrogen pill I told you about in April. This was all an amazing feeling, but also scary. Seeing my doc and taking that pill every day for 10 years was my security blanket. But I'm managing just fine now, even without that blanket. And I'm here because of people like you, your time, your love, your commitment to helping end this horrible disease. Thank you, and thank you for being here today. Although we are not together this year, we're still strong in this fight, maybe stronger than ever. As you know, this year has presented each of us with a fair number of curveballs. Our daily lives are fundamentally altered because of the coronavirus. Now imagine going through all that and finding out you have breast cancer. Maybe you also lost your job and health insurance. Make no mistake, until we have a cure, breast cancer won't stop, ever. That's why neither can we. Please join me in making sure the breast cancer community knows we are with them. By partnering with Komen Puget Sound, you make safe screenings, early detection, and treatment possible. And you support the work of researchers like Dr. Frank Senecal as they discover new treatments and break down barriers to care. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. I just am always truly inspired by your story, as I know we all are. And Michelle's right. Until we have a cure, breast cancer won't stop, and neither can we. I know that it's a pandemic and that there's a lot going on, but instead of stepping back, we're asking you to step up, please. Step up and take a stand against breast cancer by raising much needed funds for local breast cancer patients. Pandemics don't stop cancer, unfortunately. And you have an amazing opportunity right now to make a real difference in the lives of these men and women right here, right now. I know a lot of you have already donated, and I think that that is just tremendous, especially in these times. And your generosity and support of those who have fought and are fighting this battle is just vital. Now, if you haven't donated, you still have time. It's not too late. Fundraising continues until October 22nd of 2020. Yes, you got a little time here. You can make it happen. Please continue to share your fundraising page, get other people to donate, and together we can show breast cancer patients that we won't stop. We are fighting for them. Now, this concludes our luncheon program. Please visit our virtual memorial wall. Of course, you can go to this website right here. Here we go. Here's the sign. Y'all got it? It's a good website. Go visit that. And I just want to say, on behalf of the Komen Puget Sound and the Lunch for the Cure Committee, I just want to thank you so much for being here. I know it's a weird virtual world we're living in, but just know you are making a difference. Give yourself a hug, because we can't do it right now physically, but we're doing it in our hearts. Thank you again.